Faith in the Old Testament is more than just belief. It's an active trust in God, demonstrated through obedience, perseverance, and reliance on His promises. Unlike a vague sense of hope, biblical faith is deeply relational, built on God's past faithfulness and His covenant with His people. Faith as obedience. Faith is often shown through action. Abraham, for instance, is the prime example of faith in the Old Testament. In Genesis 15:6, it says, "Abram believed the Lord, and He credited it to him as righteousness." His faith was demonstrated by leaving his homeland, Genesis 12:1-4, and being willing to sacrifice Isaac, Genesis 22:1-18. Faith in the Old Testament isn't passive. It requires stepping out in obedience. Faith as trust in God's character. The Israelites in the wilderness struggled with faith, often doubting God despite witnessing miracles. However, figures like Moses and Joshua showed faith by trusting in God's guidance. Deuteronomy 7:9. Know therefore that the Lord your God is God, the faithful God who keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love Him and keep His commandments, to 1,000 generations. Faith is anchored in God's unchanging nature and His promises. Faith as perseverance in trials. Job's story exemplifies unwavering faith despite suffering. He declares in Job 13:15, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him." True faith is not based on circumstances, but on trust in God's ultimate justice and mercy. Faith in the prophets. Hope in the Messiah. The prophets consistently called Israel to faith, urging them to trust in God's future deliverance. Habakkuk 2:4. "The righteous shall live by his faith." This verse, later quoted in the New Testament, Romans 1:17, Galatians 3:11, underscores that faith is about dependence on God, not self-righteousness. Faith in the Old Testament versus New Testament. While faith in the Old Testament is rooted in God's covenant and promises, the New Testament reveals the ultimate fulfillment of faith, Jesus Christ. The faith of Abraham, Moses, and David all pointed forward to Christ, who is the perfect object of our faith, Hebrews 11. The Old Testament is filled with examples of people who demonstrated remarkable faith in God. Here are some of the most faithful individuals. 1. Abraham, the father of faith. Genesis 15:6, Hebrews 11:8-12. Faith in action. Abraham obeyed God when called to leave his homeland, Genesis 12:1-4, and later trusted Him even when asked to sacrifice Isaac, Genesis 22:1-18. His faith was counted as righteousness, Genesis 15:6. 2. Moses, faith that led a nation, Exodus 14:13-14, Hebrews 11:24-29. Faith in action. Moses trusted God to deliver Israel from Egypt, led them through the Red Sea, and received the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai. Despite challenges, he remained faithful to God's calling. 3. Job, faith in suffering. Verse, Job 13:15. "Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him." Faith in action. Job endured extreme suffering, losing everything, yet he refused to curse God. His faith was ultimately rewarded with restoration. 4. David, a man after God's own heart. Verses, 1 Samuel 17:45-47, Psalm 23. Faith in action. As a young shepherd, David trusted God to defeat Goliath. Despite personal failures, he continually repented and sought God's heart, Psalm 51. 5. Elijah, faith in God's power. Verses, 1 Kings 18:36-39, James 5:17. Faith in action. Elijah boldly confronted King Ahab and the prophets of Baal, calling down fire from heaven on Mount Carmel. He trusted God even during famine and persecution. 6. Daniel, faith in the face of danger. Verses, Daniel 6:10, Daniel 6:22. Faith in action. Daniel remained faithful to God, praying openly despite the king's decree. His faith led to God protecting him in the lion's den. 7. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, unshakable faith. Verses, Daniel 3:16-18. Faith in action. They refused to bow to Nebuchadnezzar's golden statue, choosing to trust God even if He did not save them. God miraculously delivered them from the fiery furnace. 8. Noah, faith that obeyed without seeing. Verse, Hebrews 11:7. By faith Noah, being warned by God concerning events as yet unseen, in reverent fear constructed an ark. Faith in action, Noah built the ark despite never having seen rain, trusting God's warning of the coming flood. 9. Joseph, faith through trials. Verses, Genesis 50:20, Romans 8:28. Faith in action, sold into slavery and imprisoned unjustly, Joseph remained faithful to God. His faith led to him being elevated to Pharaoh's right hand, saving Egypt and his family from famine. 10. Ruth, faith in God's providence. Verse, Ruth 1:16. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Faith in action, Ruth, a Moabite widow, left her homeland to follow Naomi and trust in Israel's God. Her faith led to her being part of Jesus's. Each of these individuals demonstrated faith in different ways. Trusting God. Faith in the Old Testament is more than just belief. It's an active trust in God, demonstrated through